Howdy, y'all. J Punch here. Happy Wednesday. This episode is brought to you by Hers, a company on a mission to make the world feel better through the power of better health. Today, I have an interview for you with Liz Beecroft. She is a therapist, mental health specialist, and she works with high performers. So, athletes, entertainers, people that are in high pressure scenarios. So, being able to chat with her today and hear from her about her love for NASCAR, but also what she would love to see improve in the world of NASCAR when it comes to mental health, I thought was very important. I'm so excited to have with me this week therapist, mental health specialist, Liz Beecroft. Liz, thanks for joining me.
Thanks for having me. This is exciting.
I'm so excited to have you here for a lot of reasons. Personally, mental health and mental health education is something that I am so passionate about, especially here in the NASCAR space. But then you look at March as a whole being Women's History Month and then also being Mental Health Awareness Month. I think it is the perfect time to have you here to talk a little bit about what you do and then also where that could kind of coincide in the NASCAR world. So, starting with you, I said therapist, mental health specialist doesn't even cover everything that you do. How do you explain to us what your role is here in this mental health world?
Yeah, it's kind of tough, honestly, for me as well, but I am a licensed therapist. By trade, I'm a clinical social worker. To be a therapist, there's a lot of different letters you can have after your name, and at the end of the day, as long as you have the training and the licensure, it really doesn't matter. So yes, I'm a licensed clinical social worker, psychotherapist, and I work primarily with high performers. So athletes, entertainers, creators, and anyone that really works in a high performing, high pressure type of workplace. I primarily have my own private practice called Mental Sesh, where I provide therapy to high performers each week. I have about 30 people that I see every week for therapy. And then on the other side of my business, I also do a lot of mental health consulting. So I've partnered with a lot of different brands from Nike, Adidas, Meta, StockX to really bring the conversation on mental health to the forefront and make those conversations more down to earth and digestible because that stigma still very much exists.
How long have you done this?
Oh my gosh, probably it's going on 7 or 8 years now.
Wow.
Yeah.
When you say high performer, can you explain? I know you said a little bit athletes, celebrities, things like that. What makes somebody a high performer and eligible to work with you?
Yeah. I mean, really, it's someone who's under a lot of pressure and doesn't even necessarily mean someone that is in the spotlight. It could be someone that's working behind the scenes, in a high pressured environment job. I've worked with people in the tech side of things, founders as well, people who are just under constant states of high levels of stress, high levels of anxiety, people who might struggle with imposter syndrome, performance anxiety, who have a really hard time managing work-life balance because their careers are so demanding, and people who struggle to remember that their identity is so much more than what they do for work.
Well, before we get too much down the rabbit hole there and how that plays here into the NASCAR world, how do you play here into the NASCAR world? Are you a race fan? I've seen you've been to races, so how did you really get ingrained in this crazy circus?
To be honest, so I'm from a very small town in Pennsylvania where Yingling is water pretty much. And I've grown up, it's about an hour south of Pocono. So growing up, I would go up to Pocono for the race. And I don't even remember that time. Honestly, I was probably 7 or 8 years old. I had a really sick Jeff Gordon shirt. That is all I can recall for that time of my life. And then fast forward to 2024, my husband and I, and two of my really good friends that live down in Florida, we got together and went back up to Pocono together with a group of friends. And we had a blast. It was such a great time. And then, started watching the NASCAR series Full Speed. And that's what really brought me in. I never realized how much of a mental game NASCAR really is and racing is. When you think of racing, you don't necessarily think of it as like a physical sport per se, although there obviously is a lot of physical training that goes into it. But what drew me in was just the high speed environments, the split second decision making, and all of the mental fitness that goes into being able to perform at such a high level. So yeah, but my husband, I would say, is more invested as of recently than I am. And by nature of him, I'm watching on Sundays and trying to stay up to date as much as I can.
I'm really glad that you brought up the Netflix series because your story of kind of re-becoming a NASCAR fan or reinserting yourself into the NASCAR world is so it's a perfect example, right, of going to a race, kind of getting a feel for it, saying, okay, this is really cool. I remember why I liked doing this as a kid,
Hmm.
but then being able to see it from such a different perspective, a more well-rounded perspective
Hmm.
through the eyes of the NASCAR series of Full Speed, the Netflix series. um I'm curious for you, both as just a fan and then also as someone with the eyes of a therapist, what was it about watching that series that kind of made you realize, wow, this is so much more, like, what elements about that series
Hmm.
really intrigued you to want to be more interested in these guys beyond just driving race cars?
Yeah, I think it was, well, there's a couple things. One is seeing the dichotomy between like some of these guys are best friends, but then they have to go out on this track and compete against one another. And just balancing those types of relationships, I can't even imagine like the mental gymnastics that you're doing just to
It's
have
so
to.
different than so many other
Mhm.
professional sports and people that I'm sure you work with. It's a very different dynamic. I'm glad you
Yeah.
brought that up.
And your team, like you have, so many people on your team, but they're not out there. They're with you, but they're not in the car, with you. And it's so different than like, a five-man starting roster on a basketball court who's out there, you're with them. There's this different type of dynamic. Another thing that really was interesting is I grew up playing sports my whole life. I played basketball, softball in college, and basketball was my first love. So seeing 2311 and Michael Jordan's involvement in the NASCAR community, it was really cool for me. I actually have my own sneaker with Nike that I designed for mental health awareness in 2023. And that's kind of what brought my story full circle, is being able to have these conversations in other spaces that I love around mental health. And so when I saw 2311, Bubba Wallace is my current favorite driver because he's, obviously under that team, but also he has the same birthday as my husband. And so we love Libras in this family. So that's another really great thing too.
That's really neat. Wow. So okay, so much of what you just said really resonates with me.
Mm-hmm.
And there's so many different conversations I want to have with you, but you just mentioning the sneaker to
Mm-hmm.
begin with, I think is kind of where this overall conversation of mental health awareness and sports come into
Mm-hmm.
play, is using things that people already love and love to wear or love to do, or people that they resonate with, and then using that to say, hey, it's cool to take care of yourself. Like, just like it's cool to wear Jordan sneakers, it's cool to ask your friends how they're doing. It's cool to go see a doctor and say, hey, I'm not feeling great. Like, so to have somebody like you resonate with what we're doing here in the NASCAR space and kind of see the similarities there. Can you speak to that a little bit in what you do, and almost a mental game of saying, hey, you already think this is cool, well, let me show you then how cool it is to take care of yourself as well.
Yeah, no, absolutely. I get it. I mean, talking about mental health is really hard. There's a lot of vulnerability in just tapping into our emotions, cognitively, but even then to bring in someone else in our life and share that openly it takes so much bravery and courage and, resilience to be able to do that. And so I kind of use the Trojan horse approach where it's like sneaking in that conversation through means of other interests that people have, whether it's sports, it's sneakers, it's fashion, it's you name it, and trying to really make it more down to earth because it is a very off-putting topic for a lot of people. And I get it. It's hard to tap into our feelings. It's hard to even understand sometimes how we are feeling and label and identify them. And so to even put the right words to certain things is a struggle for a lot of people. So even being able to say like, hey, our mental health isn't just the negative side. Like there's so many times when people hear the term mental health and they think, you know, it's like the worst of the worst. You're crazy, you're insane, you're really struggling. And it's not just that, it's also just being able to be in tune with our emotions, even the good ones. And so kind of raising awareness on that and, doing it in a way that feels safe for people and feels approachable. And I think that is what I find success in, especially through sneakers. At one point I had over 400 pair of sneakers in my collection. And the craziest thing about it is that at its core, it's a community, right? Like we all are coming from so many different walks of life, but the one thing about it is it's the stories that sneakers tell are what bring us together. Whether, I'm from a small town in Pennsylvania and some of my best friends are born and raised in New York City, and we might have so many different life experiences, but we still will like camp out and, try and get the newest release because we share a similar value, and it means something to us. And so in connecting with people on that level, and then being able to use that as kind of a driver for bigger, more important conversations, I think is just so important.
When I think about mental health in the NASCAR space, you also have to even just acknowledge your emotions, you have to give yourself the time to do so, to the
Hmm.
time and the mentality to sit down and acknowledge that. And we're talking about a fast-paced world, no pun intended. These weekends, these guys get in here, they go from sponsored event to the next event. They're speaking, they're dressed head to toe representing other people, and they're
Hmm.
responsible for so many different people, for so many different amounts of money every weekend when it
Hmm.
comes into the business side of things. And you have to step back as someone who works in the sport and look at an overall weekend and go, did they even mentally go take time to eat? I know they
Yeah.
did. They did, because we care about the physicality of ourselves and our athletes before getting in the car, but it's the same memo of needing to care about our mental health the same way in these
Yeah.
schedules.
Yeah. It's so funny because when you think of mental health, one of the biggest things people will say is like, you need to slow down, and like when you think of NASCAR, like that is the
Good
opposite of
luck.
like their
Yeah.
lifestyle, literally and figuratively. But like, encouraging the drivers to slow down is so important because they do need to just take some time for themselves and be able to process and digest everything that's happening in their lives.
And that's why we're so thankful for people like you, because they wouldn't be able to do that if they didn't have somebody like you behind the scenes helping them kind of form that toolbox, Liz. So genuinely, thank you for everything that you've done in the sports world. And I hope to see more of you here in the NASCAR world, because as we have already established, I think you would do great things here in this racing world.
Thank you. I appreciate that. And hopefully I see you soon at one of the races.
Absolutely. Whether it's Pocono, we'll have to get you
Yeah.
to another racetrack, expand your horizons here in the NASCAR space.
Yes, for sure.
For sure, Liz. Well, thank you so much for the time today, and I look forward to seeing you at a race soon.
Of course. Thank you for having me. Have a good rest of your week.
Thanks again to Liz for chatting with me, and be sure to keep up with Liz on social media at Liz Beecroft. See how her work, both in sports and entertainment, continues to change the world of mental health in the future. That's all I got for you this week. Mamba's going to be back hanging out with y'all tomorrow, so be sure to tune into NASCAR Daily on all of the podcast platforms, or NASCAR's YouTube, or even on the NASCAR channel on Tubi. Thanks for hanging out with me. Have a great Wednesday. Bye, y'all.